spretna pod suncem, rasti u jaslama dječjim, rasti i cvjetaj zemljo radnih ljudi, i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada, mir tvojim lađama napučini i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide, sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije самых окраин, с южных гор до северных морей. Человек проходит как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, слава ей, повторили. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу морей. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу морей. За столом никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Страна моя родная, слава ей, повторили. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу морей. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу морей. Над страной весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, слава ей, повторили. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу морей. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу морей.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome along. It is a live stream where we discuss the current hysteria of the presence of, or the banning of, TikTok, or whatever it is that the US Congress is aiming to do at the moment. So we will start on that in just a moment, but before that we will do our customary walk through those who are present in the chat and greet everybody accordingly. And this is a simultaneous live stream, of course, on Rumble and on Odyssey. So if we get banned on here, you know where to find the alternates. And be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. So let me just make some adjustments here and then we can get underway. I am just going to share the stream across various different platforms. If you have specific questions, be sure to pose them in the chat. Right, and I'm still experimenting with how to get to do the live on Twitter and Telegram at the same time. So far that option hasn't been included in the software I'm using. Right, okay. Advertising duly conducted. We will move to our greetings of the chat so far. So, Tim Gray, good evening to you. Dr. Ahmed, who joined us from Egypt, hello to you. Good to have you with us. DE, who says, evening from the southern sector. I'm sure you're referring to the southern sector of merry old England. Tim Gray says, the interesting thing about the TikTok freakouts is whatever action the establishment take is already too late. One thing social media has proven is that nothing can be hidden over the long term. Good point. There's a question of which song is which on the introductory music from Tobias. What I'm going to do is just post up the list that this particular musical collection is made from. I'll put that up on the Telegram group tomorrow. And Davey joins us from Bangor, Gwynedd. Hello, good to have you with us from the Republic of Wales. Svetlana, who says, comradely greetings from Moscow. Good to have you here. Carmo, who joins us from merry old England, or perfidious Albion, if you prefer. Jenny, who says, good afternoon, comrades, with emphasis on the Z. And Mutanda says, Huawei, the best phone I ever had, then the US banned them. Well, if you can't compete anymore, try and ban it. And of course, it's becoming increasingly obvious that in certain areas the US is unable to compete, hence the hysteria over China as well. Right, Otis, who says, good evening, comrades, workers of the world unite. Excellent stuff. President Jesus says, did any of the squat vote against this bill to ban TikTok? No, I mean, as far as I'm able to tell, AOC certainly, trademark, was out there doing the rounds, bigging this up, saying, oh no, it's not a ban on TikTok, it's just forcing the Chinese parent company to divest from it. So it's not about restricting free speech at all, she lied. Ben, who joins us from Hungary, and Mutanda says, respect to the Chinese working class, good point. Jawad says, hi comrades, when do you think the left in Britain truly gave the capitalist imperialists a scare? What, the ruling class? Well, there was the period 68 to 85, I would say, particularly 68 to 74. Even afterwards, I think there was, you had a vicious eruption of class war that ran for 16 years, 17 years, 68 to 85. After that, given the gargantuan and horrific nature of the defeat of the miners, probably not very much since then, but then again, the ruling class themselves have weakened since then. So I would say 85 was the last one, but all that means is we're about due for another one. Good evening to Peter, who joins us from perfidious Albion. Otis says, got fucking sick of Galloway going on about the fucking real parasites. Is that what he's doing? Oh my god. Well, that's one of my many issues with Galloway. He says he's not a royalist, but I don't really believe him. Ian Foster, good evening to you, comrade. SR says, was there freedom of speech in the Soviet Union at any time? Yes, there was. If you read the Albert Zemansky book, Human Rights in the Soviet Union, you can see that in actual fact in the late 70s, early 80s, the so-called dissidents could demonstrate quite freely. It's just that nobody in the Soviet working class was particularly interested in anything they had to say. The people who were interested in what the Soviet dissidents had to say were the imperialists. And they only got boosted in Soviet media when Gorbachev and Yakovlev deliberately set out to undermine and destroy the Soviet system in order to destroy communism in order to convert to capitalism. So, yeah, there was freedom of speech in the Soviet Union. In fact, there was far more freedom for working class people to raise issues about the system, even in the later Brezhnev period, than there ever has been in the post-Soviet world. Freedom of speech is often considered purely in bourgeois terms. You've got the right in the bourgeois system to say anything you like at any time, as long as it doesn't matter. As long as you're an isolated voice, and we'll come to this when we talk about the TikTok thing, as long as you're an isolated voice, as long as no one's listening to you, you can say anything you like. I mean, earlier on today, I was talking to three comrades in a reading group we're doing on E.P. Thompson's The Making of the English Working Class, and we were studying a chapter from that book dealing with why and how the ruling class went into a sort of frenzy and orgy of repression against the working class in the 1790s. And it was because the working class became politicized. That's why the repression came in. Because the thing that the ruling class fears more than anything else in the world is the working class becoming politicized, class conscious, organized, and therefore revolutionary in their actions. If you're an isolated agitator being listened to by nobody, then they'll give you all the freedom of speech that you want. Actually start connecting with workers, and workers start picking up the ideas that you're talking about and taking them further and turning them into real working class actions. That's the point where freedom of speech disappears. Good afternoon to Martin, who joins us from what is apparently a pollen-covered corner of the United States. Hello to Slava, who's joined us. And we've also got Paulina Vasiliev. If you read the bill, it doesn't mention TikTok at all. It's a broad censorship bill against any company deemed to be under influence from adversary nations. So, yes, but the principal target is TikTok, and that's the one that keeps getting talked about. However, it is a broader censorship bill, which is what Paulina points out in the comment there, and Michael Tracy points it out as well. In that you could say that any social media company is under influence from adversary nations. You could say, and this is why. I'll tell you what. I'll finish doing the greetings, and we'll come to that in a minute. Okay, Alpai Bella, who says hello. Good evening to you in London. Who else do we have here? And okay, we've greeted everybody. Oh, James Graham, hello to you. So yeah, to go back to the point that Michael Tracy made about this was that the whole bill was essentially a giant censorship bill. TikTok is the focus of it because this is something that the Democrats and the Republicans all agree on. They all agree that TikTok is dangerous. They agree upon it for different reasons, but they both agree that the whole thing is a dastardly plot by the Communist Party of China. Now, incidentally, if you've ever seen those comparison videos floating around of the differences between TikTok in the United States and TikTok in China, it's all videos like teenagers doing videos about science experiments, mostly, it would seem. And in the United States, it's all kinds of like weird shit. But it ain't the weird shit as to why they're banning it. Remember, there's all kinds of disgusting crap on the version of Twitter. The pre-Elon Musk version of Twitter was all kinds of disgusting garbage on there, including various forms of pornography that the US Congress didn't have a freak out about. So why are they having a freak out? Not specifically. Well, TikTok is the thing that keeps obsessing them, that they keep going back to and talking about. So why are they engaging in yet another form of censorship of social media? I think there's a couple of reasons, and there's also an interesting reason as to why Trump suddenly turned around and decided that he wasn't in favor of a TikTok ban, despite the fact that his administration was pushing for it towards the end of his time in office. And the reason why Trump and Carlson came out against it was because they suddenly realized that the way that this was being worded could essentially shut down any social media platform that could be deemed to be falling under foreign influence. So it could be a means by which they ultimately force Musk to sell Twitter or X, depending upon your preferred nomenclature. Um, they're very much afraid of that. So they turned on this idea of banning TikTok, or it's not a ban per se, but it's forcing the parent company to sell it, which, I mean, it's already being monitored and interfered with heavily by the US national security state. If it was, if the Chinese parent company was forced to divest of it entirely, it would probably get bought up by various entities that are far more amenable to direct control by the US security state, which means that essentially a lot of accounts will be taken down or heavily restricted. Now they are particularly concerned, and the Anti-Defamation League has come out and said this, about videos to do with Gaza and the war going on there. But I think it's mostly down, it's another manifestation of the same problem that the US political establishment keeps having, which is that the narrative has escaped their control. The point that Tim Gray made early on in the comments is that the reason they're freaking out about this, and this was said by the Republican member of Congress who moved the bill, that one of the reasons they're doing this is that it's watched overwhelmingly by the under 30s. Now the under 30s don't watch the bourgeois press, the bourgeois media, almost ever. For a lot of them anyway, especially those who are extremely online. They're not watching CNN or BBC or Sky or any of the other major US channels. They will watch a YouTube video or watch a 60-second TikTok video, perhaps, if they consume news at all. And so people who are doing like 60-second or 2-minute TikTok videos on Gaza or related issues, like Eddie from Midwestern Marx uses the platform quite effectively, from what I've seen in the way that he does his videos. It's stuff like that that they want to ban. It's nothing to do with like all the other dubious stuff that goes on TikTok. It's the politicized stuff. It's the stuff that is making an impact with the under 30s in particular. And like all foolish ruling classes that are on the way down, they think that by banning it that they can essentially, or not by banning it directly, but by heavily censoring it, that they can essentially put the genie back in the lamp, so to speak, or pour the wine back into the bottle. But it's already escaped. The things that this has already escaped their control. Like if you recall, each of the waves of social media censorship that has occurred since really 2016. See, prior to 2016. The internet was a lot more of a free place, which is strange to think about because I actually didn't spend much time doing like online stuff at all before 2016. It was that particular period in time which sort of pushed me into a new direction, politically speaking, and I ended up doing more online stuff then, particularly arguments over Brexit at the time, and the waves of censorship that followed coincided with various different things. So the Trump phenomenon in the United States, that provoked the first report into Russian interference in the American electoral process. You remember the sacred US electoral process that has absolutely no interference in it from any outside parties whatsoever. Remember the first report about Russian interference named things like Abby Martin's old show on Russia Today as being a source of Russian disinformation. And really it was a gigantic exercise in shifting the blame from themselves for Trump's victory over onto literally anything else. So the thing they were obsessed with back then in 2016 and 17 was Facebook. They had this idea that was prominent in both America and Britain, that Brexit and Trump had happened because boomers had been sharing videos, sharing disinformation videos with the with the with their with like relatives that had fallen under the influence of Russian disinformation, and this was why so many people had voted for Trump and voted for Brexit. Of course, it was a cope, to use the parlance of our times, a piece of bullshit, and that's when they started, you know, getting onto Zuckerberg, who willingly went along with them, to create a more active censorship regime on Twitter. Sorry, not on Twitter, on Facebook. And Twitter followed swiftly along behind, though, of course, we know from the revelations reported by the Grey Zone and others that British intelligence had people from the 77th Brigade in the hierarchy of Twitter. Over and over again, it was shown that they were operating in various different regional roles on Twitter under the old management system, under the old ownership structure, and they had this in place for a number of years. So British military intelligence was involved with it. The American various different intelligence agencies were intimately involved with the censorship of Twitter, as Matt Taibbi revealed. And so the two waves of hysteria regarding Facebook and regarding Twitter resulted in what? It resulted in the owners, in the case of the still controlling influence in Meta, as we've got to call it now, Facebook, which is Zuckerberg, and the former ownership structure of Twitter, both agreed to basically employ a load of state assets in running a censorship and intelligence gathering operation on these platforms. So that's what they're after with TikTok as well. This is what this is all about. I don't think you'll see them banning TikTok outright. What they want to do is to do the same thing that they did with Facebook and with Twitter, which is make the content more easily manipulated, make the various different pieces of content that are critical of US imperialism, critical of Israel, critical of certain policies, make that more easy to ban or to hide or to shadow ban, so to say. And that's what they're after. They're after fully, turning TikTok into essentially an arm of, or something which is heavily under the influence of, the US national surveillance operations. And that's what they're after with TikTok. That's what I think that this bill is ultimately about. You force the parent company to divest from it, then it's bought up by various different interests in the United States. So as I say, you won't see the stuff that gets people legitimately angry about stuff you find on TikTok. That won't be banned. It'll be all the political stuff that's now actually genuinely reaching people, especially younger people. That's the stuff that'll get banned. And it'll be monitored to death, and people will be prosecuted for putting stuff on there. This stuff's already happened in Britain, specifically with relation to tweets and Facebook posts. They've already established a legal precedent for prosecuting people because of what they post online. And they did this during the COVID regime. They did this. They've also done this to people who were accused of saying racist things to football players online. By using these more unsympathetic figures, they established the precedent that you can be prosecuted for hate speech for things that you posted on Twitter. What's the implication of that? Is that, well, now that they've established that precedent, we've already seen how they attempted initially to use anti-racist laws against my own comrades for selling a book with, which has its title, a comparison between Zionism and fascism, a legitimate comparison that many scholars have made. And that was done under anti-racism laws. So this is the game. The game is to establish a precedent, often using unsympathetic examples, and then once you've got the law there on the books, you can then use it against anybody else. So again, the aim of this whole thing with Twitter is to bring it completely under the control of the US surveillance state, and then turn it into a tool for intelligence and information gathering, just the same way they turned Twitter into one, just the same way as they've turned Facebook into one. Like, the thing you've got to be aware of when you're posting on any of these platforms is that this is all getting recorded somewhere in some gigantic database. Even if there's not a single person monitoring it, it'll be raked over then by an algorithm. If they want to, they program an algorithm to search out everything you ever posted online in order to bring a charge against you. That's exactly what they will do. As I said, when you're looking back at the way that particularly the British ruling class has done repression in the past, way back into the past, they'll let you slide on various different things when it doesn't matter. But as soon as it starts to matter, as soon as if you're giving out a message that is starting to get listened to, they'll harvest now everything you've ever written, everything you've ever said, everything you've ever expressed support for, put it into a giant document and find something to charge you with. That's why they're so concerned with all this data gathering. All this data gathering is there to essentially give them a case to make against you when they feel like they need to. And they don't constantly go after people all the time for it, because that would stir up too much opposition. The ruling class, and this is true in the United States as well, and in the United States, of course, you have a little bit more additional protection, though I wouldn't say much, in the form of the constitutional guarantee of free speech, which of course they're doing their absolute best to erode. But here it's very easy to prosecute you for things that you've said online because we have no such guarantee. And even if the case against you doesn't hold up, they can still tie you up in court for months on end. They can stop you from broadcasting. They can stop you from attending demonstrations. All these things are powers which are in their capability to unleash upon you at any given time. So this is the way that things stand at the moment. So I'm going to pause there for catching up with various different comments in the chat before we go further. So Massimiliano Urbani joins us from Melbourne. Good morning, is it to you? Alpai says, as a side note, what do you know about the works of Dmitry Galkovsky? Russians with Attitude did an interesting video on him, but I could not find any works translated into English on him. I don't know. I've heard of the name, but that's it. So until I know more, I'm going to avoid commenting because I have no knowledge of his work. Ben says the EU also just passed a media freedom bill, which I'm equally skeptical of. Misinformation in wording, but haven't read in full. I think we can guess what's in it, given the obsession that the EU bureaucracy has with Russian disinformation. It'll be a censorship bill dressed up under various different labels. They'll call it a freedom bill. It's actually a bill which probably licenses more state surveillance, but that's another thing for me to look up. Perfidious Albion, or as an Irish nationalist called it, the bitch and the harlot of the North Sea. Catchy, says Svetlana. Yeah, accurate description. As William Blake once said, the beast and the whore rule unrestricted. And that was he wrote that in the late 18th century. Question from Svetlana. Right-wing media keep calling the woke brigade Marxist. It annoys me greatly. What the hell have the woke got to do with scientific Marxism? Well, I did a whole program on this, on so-called cultural Marxism, a while ago when I was just doing audio only, but I'll give you a brief outline here. Look, the right-wingers have been using the term cultural Marxism against anybody they don't like, not just recently, but for decades now. They were doing this as far back as the 1920s, but let's deal with the more recent side of things. You have in the United States, and in Britain to a certain extent, two halves of a self-sustaining bourgeois political divide. And this is particularly true online. You have the bourgeois aligned left, who are these clowns that generally line up and tell people to vote for the Democratic Party, the CPUSA, etc. And they are the sort of the woke left types. They'll even call themselves communists from time to time. But what are their obsessions? Their obsessions are deeply petty bourgeois reactionary trends such as forms of purely race politics or gender ideology, and they'll dress this up in pseudo-Marxist terms about, I don't know, overcoming the traditional family or decolonizing a particular space or something like that. It's linked to bourgeois academia and the fraud that is academic Marxism. So Svetlana's right when she says that when she asks what the hell does the woke have to do with scientific Marxism, it doesn't have anything to do with scientific socialism at all. What it is it's the most rotten and latest manifestation of the bourgeois, or as I think Gabriel Rockhill has called it, the compatible left. And it's that form of the left which is invested in keeping pushing people back towards bourgeois politics, making sure that the name of Marxism or the understanding of Marxism that the masses have remains limited or bastardized, disgracing the name of Marxism by associating it with things like gender ideology and racialized identity politics and things like that, and by screaming hysterically all the time at anybody who disagrees with them, by behaving in such a way as to train wreck in a deeply sectarian fashion any movement that could come along that might just contain even the remotest amount of class politics. That's why I mean the term the bourgeois left or the compatible left is completely apt of these people, because their job is to act as a support structure for bourgeois politics. They sabotage any campaign, any movement that, as I said, might lead towards greater class consciousness by calling it racist or calling it transphobic or something like that. I mean, there was a visible manifestation of this in the way that they managed to make the already completely inadequate social democratic campaign of Sanders even worse. So Sanders is always, of course, an inadequate and treacherous figure. But some people got attracted towards particularly his first campaign. The same is true of Corbyn, because they thought it represents some form of class politics, which in a very, very small way you could say that it did. Certainly a lot of people went through the Sanders campaign and ended up as communists, or quite a number of people who have told me that that was their experience in terms of their radicalization. Same is true for me in the Corbyn experience. I only discovered Marxist-Leninism after I'd gone through the Corbyn experience and seen what a contemptible failure it all was. But even that tiny slither of the most basic elements of class politics that the Sanders campaign had in it in 2016 was all gone by 2020. Why? Because the whole thing was now being run by the bourgeois left. The left that is entirely invested in bourgeois politics, that will use Marxist phraseology but with no Marxist content to push people back into the Democratic Party, or in our case in Britain, back into the Labour Party, whose expressions of various forms of woke politics are basically just an expression of some different forms of various elements of liberalism, hyper-focused on individual rights, hyper-focused on extending the power of the bourgeois state, and usually with themselves as the administrators of it, that kind of thing. And so it's got nothing to do with scientific socialism whatsoever, but it's what has been sold as Marxism by the left, the bourgeois left, and the right. The right are also very happy to have their eternal battle with the bourgeois left, because each feeds off the other. The bourgeois left does loads of ridiculous things, like, as chronicled on the Libs of TikTok account. And then the bourgeois right then feeds off that by saying to people who look at the left and think, well, they're ridiculous and I don't want anything to do with them. And the right will come along and go, and yeah, you see, they are ridiculous. And you know what? They're working for Joe Biden. And these people are communists, which means that Joe Biden's a communist. And communism ruins every country it takes over, which is why our country is ruined. It's why California is the most ruined of all, because California is the most communist, because it's run by Gavin Newsom, who is a communist, who is Nancy Pelosi's nephew, who is an even bigger communist. And you know all these people are tied to Joe Biden, and you know that Joe Biden's paid by communist China to ruin America and have us conquered by the agents of Xi Jinping, who are blue-haired maniacs, who want to turn your children into non-gender specific freaks. Now, everything I've just said, if you break it up, sounds ridiculous, but there's whole videos on YouTube with hundreds of thousands of views who will tell you exactly that. And it doesn't make any sense when you examine it for more than 10 seconds, just as the woke left stuff doesn't make any sense either. But what it's designed to do is to provide you with a narrative that takes you where? A narrative that takes you right the way back to, if it's on the left, it's voting for Joe Biden. If it's on the right, it's voting for Donald Trump, or voting Republican, or getting involved in the Republican Party somehow. That's where it takes you. Or if you're British, voting for Nigel Farage and the so-called Reform Party. The left and the right feed off each other. It's quite by design that they feed off each other. The ridiculousness of the left is designed to push people towards the right. The racism and open chauvinism of the right is designed to push people back to the bourgeois left. Each will claim the other is the end of civilization. The right will claim the left is communist. The left will claim the right is fascist. Each will tell partial truths about the other, and each is designed to keep pushing the working class and the middle class round in a circle where they keep going round and never actually see that this whole game, this circle that they are in, is a rigged operation, that it's the bourgeois behind both of these, and that this whole thing is a show designed to keep you entertained, principally, and not conscious. Certainly not class conscious, because neither of them, not the left, not the right, actually wants to talk about raising the level of class consciousness. They don't want to actually talk about working class action. The right wants to talk about how the left wants to turn all your Disney characters gender fluid, and the left wants to talk about how Donald Trump's going to deport your neighbor immediately and institute a fascist state. And again, you can keep on this fucking merry-go-round for a long time, and that is exactly what it is designed to do. So no, it's got nothing to do with scientific socialism, and the people who designed the compatible left know damn well that it doesn't. But it's paid pretty well for them so far, so why should they give it up? If there's demands for me to do a whole program on cultural Marxism, I can happily do so. I hope that answered Svetlana's question in some way. Okay, where are we now? Guy asks, greetings from Brazil. Sorry for bringing up your last video. If some comrade is interested in regards to Lula's operation in Haiti, the military turned against his party anyway. So did the US. Yeah, so he basically performed services for the US and lost anyway. And by the accounts that I've seen, he hasn't learned that particular lesson yet. Okay. Dr. Ahmed says, so it's the same old secret police tactics. Have a file on everyone until you need to frame him or blackmail him or to recruit him. Yeah, that's basically it. And the British pioneered this tactic, by the way. They were one of the first to pioneer modern policing methods. And the more you read about their history, the more you see that things don't change. The platforms change, the level of technology changes, but the methods are always the same. And now Britain and America have bigger police states than at any point in their history before. Paul says, greetings. I've been catching most lives since you started doing them, but I'm not usually in a position to go into the chat due to work. This is a great live stream, just the one on Haiti was. Well, be sure to go back and catch the one on Haiti. Again, I'm trying to get a guest lined up to talk more knowledgeably about that, but keep an eye on Haiti because it's going to be a big issue. And if you haven't read the old archives from the Daily Worker on the occupation by the US of Haiti from 1915 to 1934, then you can find those on the Marxist Internet Archive. I posted the Albert Moreau article yesterday, and also I posted it on the Telegram channel. All the same reasons why they went into Haiti in 1915. Many of those are in play right now as well. Ben says what's even worse is that they're using our language, liberation of women, decolonization, anti-imperialism, to mark targets for US imperialism. Yeah, I mean, this is the way they've always done things. Bear in mind that they also, that is the US imperialists, used to fund Maoist operations, and still do, I think, in various different countries. They'll take anything they possibly can, strip out all of its meaning, and then use it to attract people. I mean, they used to run fake Maoist operations in the United States. If you look at the book called Heavy Radicals, which chronicles the infiltration of by the FBI the Revolutionary Communist Party, which is what's now like the Bobovakian cult. Back when it was in its early days of the Revolutionary Communist Party, before it became just a one-man vehicle for Bobovakian's ego, they were actually a pretty serious organization for a while. They were doing a lot of work to get themselves established in working class areas, in different union branches, and that of course drew the attention of the FBI, who very thoroughly infiltrated their organization. But also the FBI used to set up like fake Maoist organizations in the United States. This has all been declassified now. So this is something which they've got a very long history of doing. They'll set up a fake organization that's designed to either lure people in and then monitor them, or they'll set up a fake organization and then they'll fill it full of agents who will then push people who come towards it to carry out illegal acts. I mean, look at how the FBI handled the so-called war on terror. Look at the amount of people they entrapped, who are usually like, shall we say, mentally ill, younger Muslim men in the United States, who an FBI undercover agent or an informant would go to them and basically say, hey brother, by Allah, we should strike those infidels right now, yeah? Say yes. I've got a bomb, by the way. Say yes. Say yes to take this bomb over to strike the infidels. Say yes into my lapel here. And then they get the guy to say the requisite words on file, to get it on file, and then prosecute him and say, hey, look at the terrorist act we just stopped. Guy get 20 years. Glenn Greenwald's talked about this extensively, and it was even made into a film called The Day Shall Come by Chris Morris, the British film director. It even had some pretty high-profile Hollywood people in it. But this was all done, like this was Robert Mueller's thing that made his name, framing mentally ill people for crimes they were never going to commit, who they'd been enticed into saying they were going to commit them by undercover FBI agents. Again, like if you don't believe that the FBI is doing this and other intelligence agencies online right now, and if they're not in loads of different chat groups, Reddit boards, in Twitter conversations, on Facebook, trying to entice people into committing by word, into saying that they're going to do a terrorism or something like that. It can be people on the left, can be Muslims, can be right-wingers. I mean, look at the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. It turned out that most of the people involved in that were either FBI agents or informants for the FBI. The whole thing was a cook-up job. And they brought the case against those guys who they'd entrapped anyway. And so this whole thing is a farce from top to bottom. And we go back to the question of how TikTok and social media are used to influence people. They've got legions of people, not just direct federal government employees, but people in outsourced companies online right now, trying to engage people in conversations, trying to lead them down pathways where they can claim that they said certain terrorist buzzwords. It's all out there, and it's why they're so keen to have firm control over each platform. They think that this gives them a means by which that they can re-establish control over the narrative, that they can use this to isolate ringleaders and have them prosecuted, that kind of thing, that they can put in a pervasive atmosphere of fear and intimidation so that people stop expressing critical opinions on social media platforms. This is the kind of thing that they're doing because they can't resolve any material issues for the working class, and they know that. The system's in a deep crisis, and the smarter end of the state bureaucrats know that as well. They've convinced themselves, and they convinced a legion of idiots in the political establishment that, well, if we just re-establish control over the narrative, If we just shut out all this disinformation, if we lock up people, then we can have people purely on message again. They want to get back to the model they thought they had back in the 90s and the 80s, where everybody would only watch CNN and ABC and NBC, and everybody would only read like the New York Times or the New York Post or the LA Times or something. And the bourgeois had a complete monopoly almost on the information that got out there. Why are, Michael Parenti's old classic talks only on yellowed VHS? Because Michael Parenti, as he chronicles in his book Creating Reality, I think it's called, on his piece of media criticism, which is far better than Chomsky's work, by the way. Parenti chronicles, and actually wrote it in the 90s, the early 90s, how he could never get in the national press. He'd like get one editorial in a national newspaper a year if he was lucky. He would never get on television. His lectures would never be featured by any of the major bourgeois outlets. And we all know why. Because if you actually watch a Parenti lecture, you leave with some fundamental questions about the way the U.S. state is organized, about who the ruling class are, about American history, or British history, come to that matter. So again, this is an example why 40 years ago, somebody like Parenti would have been known to only a few thousand people in the United States. Now he's probably known to hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million, thanks to all of his work being on the internet. And they've not managed to stamp that out yet because the internet's too vast. They keep trying to find ways to hide things, to delete things, to make sure you can't access certain things, and they've been successful to a degree. But if you've got any skill with regard to carrying out an internet search, you can still find the requisite information. They can't pour this wine back into the bottle now. Things are too far gone. To actually do what they would want to do and re-establish firm control over the information flow, they need to essentially switch off the internet, find a way to completely reset it and switch it back on again. But because so much money is made on the internet now, that's rather hard for them to do. I wouldn't rule it out if they get into serious trouble, but something which at the moment it's hard for them to carry out. But this is the sign of delusion. The delusion is that if they can get control over the narrative again, they can convince people that Biden isn't losing his mind, that the economy in the United States is actually doing just fine, that a man can become a woman just by wishing it was so, that the Chinese are going to invade us for the sake of our wonderful chip production industry or something, and the Ukrainians are winning the war against the Russians, and that Putin is going to fall any minute now. But of course, they won't be able to do any of that. There's too much truth has escaped. Right. Where have we got to now? Hello to Irish Partisan, who has joined the chat. Good to have you with us, comrade, all the way from the semi-planned economy of Belarus. Yeah, maybe Irish Partisan suggests Danny Shaw. Yeah, I was thinking him or Kim Ives to come on and talk about it. Sid Hadfield says, I'm not sure the NED needs to back a revolutionary group in the Philippines when they outright control Manila and have for a long time. No, I don't. I mean, I know there's been a rumor that the Filipino Maoists were under the control of the U.S. intelligence agencies. I've never bought into that. I mean, for all that one can have criticisms of Maoism, like the Filipino Maoist insurgency there has been going toe-to-toe with the Filipino state for decades now. And I wouldn't say that the charge against them of being tools of the imperialists particularly sticks when all of the Filipino presidents have been tools of the imperialists. I mean, I know that there was some controversy over certain of them, but they've never really escaped the control of the U.S. imperialists, in my view. And now they've got a Marcos Jr. in there. There's even less of a chance of them escaping the control of the U.S. imperialists. So it's unlikely. It's unlikely. that is the case. I mean, there was an argument that Duterte was an independent figure, but I don't think that's particularly true. I think he was just a bit more of a nutter than most. Right. Hello to Cobra Commander who's joined us. And Dr. Ahmed says, Gretchen kidnapping hoax, 15 FBI informants agents with an organization of 26 people, more than 50% FBI. Yes, of course. What better plot to have than one which you entirely created and controlled? Sid says, Duterte probably represented a faction of the Filipino bourgeoisie, but he was no friend of the people. Very true. The Chinese are after our freedom fries, says DE. Mary says, please do a show on cultural Marxism and the compatible left. Frank says, please, a few words about the future of Iran. Well, interesting. Anything I say on that is going to be purely based on what I've gleaned from various different sources on, like, Telegram and what's going on at the moment. I mean, from what I can tell, the Iranian government seems to have weathered the storm from the last overthrow attempt that that the US was involved with. Was it last year? They seem to be fairly secure in power at the moment. Certainly, I would say that it would seem that between a fifth and a quarter of the population solidly and consistently supports the continuation of the system that was put in place by the Islamic Revolution of 1979 to 80. I'm aware of the various different class struggles and class contradictions in Iran, certainly. So before I go further into that, though, Frank, that's all I'm confident in saying at the moment. Give me a few days to go further into it, and I'm happy to do a program specifically on Iran. If you want me to, put it down on the list or send me a question to the email address. +1 for cultural Marxism, says Muzzle Paint. Well, it's always a popular one to do. You start talking about cultural Marxism and Jordan Peterson will magically appear. Though perhaps he's too busy justifying Israeli genocide at the moment. That apparently is where the money is. I mean, I saw Kev Almassian getting rightly angry that Peterson just blocked him rather than answer a question from him about Israel. And Peterson is just an example of, like, what I talked about earlier, like, both left and right in the imperialist countries are just ways of funneling you back into the bourgeois political system. If you become discontented with the left in the bourgeois political system, then the way is opened for you to go and join Jordan Peterson, talking about how they've turned Beauty and the Beast gender fluid or something, or there are two dragons inside of you. They are constantly fighting with each other. Are you going to go with the pink transgender dragon, or are you going to go with I just can't take it anymore? That's all too much. The Kermit the Frog impression. Are you going to go with your blue-haired weirdo on the left? And Jordan Peterson's job is to give you an overly intellectualized journey into complete drivel. I read the first chapter of Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning. I think that was the title. And it's Jungian dross. It really is. And I have very low opinions of the work of Carl Jung. I think he's like pseudo-intellectual fucking garbage, to be honest. I don't dismiss all of psychoanalysis by any means. Like, I find value in the work of Freud and value in the work of Jacques Lacan, but Jung, and particularly like Jung's interpreters like Peterson, just garbage. And Peterson himself, I mean, I pity anybody who went to that debate between him and Zizek. Can you even imagine that? I mean, Zizek, who doesn't even claim to be a Marxist anymore, I don't think he ever really did. And Peterson quoting from the Communist Manifesto, saying, "It says here that you want to take people's property. I can't imagine it. Why do you want to take people's property?" And Zizek replying, going, "Yes, it is very good, but the thing you miss is that I am constantly on legally over-the-counter speed." What an absolute fucking shit show that must have been to watch that. My God. I can't. One day I may have to watch a recording of it just to see how bad it was. Martin says Alan Dulles' wife was a patient of Jung. Well, if you were married to Alan Dulles, I imagine you would have needed a lot of fucking therapy. I think Jung would have been the very least of her options. I think she would have needed severe medication and a trip to the ghost of Freud. Irish Partisan wants me to do an impression of Tom Perez. Tell you what, Irish Partisan, I've done Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Zizek tonight. I'm going to save the other impressions for tomorrow. If you're lucky tomorrow, I may do an impression of Alex Jones talking to Tom Perez. That may be the latest thing. So, Sid says, I'm largely of the belief that psychology for the most part is a quack science. Not completely, though. I mean, depends, I would say. I mean, there's, as I said, I think that there are insights to be gathered from the psychoanalytic field. I think certainly someone like Frantz Fanon proves that with his work in the Wretched of the Earth, and that shows there is a lot to be learned there. I mean, I think that the field of psychology has been pushed into the realm of the quack and the realm of the bizarre, because that's what's happened to all of the so-called sciences under the decaying bourgeois system. Even the hard sciences, the way they're taught is like descending into like increasingly irrelevant bullshit quite a lot of the time. Admittedly, you can mess around less with a hard science like chemistry or biology, but certainly some of the stuff that is done in theoretical physics, which is just purely theoretical, I mean, some of that stuff seems more like faith-based. It's faith-based stuff than anything else. Right. Peterson, this is from Svetlana, always looks to me as if he is about to burst into tears. Well, he usually does. I mean, he usually starts crying and gets emotional over the strangest of things. That and like he was hooked on, like, wasn't he hooked on something pretty severe for a while? We'll come back to that. President Jesus says, Zizek agreed with Peterson that the Communist Manifesto is horrible. He defended capital, however, which proves that Zizek hasn't read the Communist Manifesto properly. And I doubt that he's read Capital, because if you've read Capital and if you've read the Communist Manifesto, you can see the foundations for the latter are contained in the former, meaning that all of the foundations that Marx starts to build in the 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts, through to the Communist Manifesto, through to the Grundriss, forward to the critique of political economy, through to Capital's volume 1, 2, and 3, and now the stuff I'm getting onto, which is his critique of political economy in the theories of surplus value, which is described as the 4th volume of Capital. You can see that it was all leading to Capital. It was what Zizek seems to have defended at various points is the idea of the epistemic break, meaning that there is a separate there is a separation between the good Marx and the bad Marx. Now, it depends upon who you want to listen to as to whether which part of Marx's career is good or bad. There was a trend in the early 90s to the mid 90s of saying like, oh, the early Marx is more humanistic, whatever the hell that means, and the later Marx is too mechanical and too anti-human. Zizek seems to be taking the opposite in his usual way. But the truth is, there was no break. There was a continually evolving piece of work whereby everything that is present, or a lot of what is present, I should say, in the 1844 manuscripts, the work he develops there, and particularly with regard to his critique of his engagement with and the critique of Adam Smith and his development of the theories of alienation, is developed and developed and developed consistently all the way through to Capital. So you can see the clear line of development through all of his work in the later 1840s, 50s, 60s. Like, it's all of a piece. So to divide it up and say, oh, well, I like this bit and not that bit, well, then you're being a fool. You're not taking into account the fact that Marx always saw, and Engels always saw this as one always developing piece of work that were linked by 1,000 strands between the different aspects of it. Right. Okay, where have we got to now? Apparently it was benzo addiction for Peterson. Gillian says, I'm a physicist and I agree the subject is disappearing up its own bum. Yeah, that was just my suspicion. I mean, I lived with a couple of physicists in my university days in my master's year, and both of them seem to have a certain suspicion of theoretical physics as well. It seems to me just pure speculation. I mean, if you are a theoretical physicist, I'd be happy to hear a counterpoint to that. The only good bit of that debate, says Jenny, was when Zizek asked JP where all the Marxist professors were. Well, I can imagine Peterson's response. They're all at Disney. They're all making our precious folk tales now. They've taken it all over. That kind of thing. That's usually his usual response, is to start crying and talking about Disney movies or lobsters. Clinton Frazier says, once tried to read Peterson, but the first chapter was all about lobsters. Yeah, imagine the high-status lobster. The high-status lobster can attract a mate by snapping his claws in a rhythmic fashion, or something like that. Svetlana says, Peterson and Douglas Murray both know which side their bread is buttered. Yes. I think Peterson is genuinely insane. Murray is a cynic. Well, I'd say Murray is a cynic, but he's also an ardent defender of a system that has worked out very well for him. He's an ardent defender of British imperialism, and he's an ardent defender of American imperialism, and he gets very well rewarded for doing that. He is the classic bourgeois intellectual. Abtin Kamoshi says, Peterson was comfortable with Zizek because both are professional shit talkers. He had a pleasant, non-threatening conversation rather than a debate. Yeah, I would, if you really want to stick Peterson in a situation that would make him cry, actually have him debate a Marxist-Leninist. Have him debate somebody who would actually go in there and defend Stalin. That would be, I'd want to see that. Have him debate, I'm sure the Midwestern Marx guys would do it. Carlos or Eddie or Noah would do it. And Peterson wouldn't have to travel too far. That would be, I'd actually watch that. Peterson wouldn't turn up, and if he did, he'd start crying. And his online legion of fans would justify it. Apparently, Foucault is the best example of a Marxist, according to Peterson, so says Thomas. I'm not surprised. I mean, Foucault, to call Foucault a Marxist is like anybody who does that should be sued under the Trades Descriptions Act. Foucault, of course, had been a member of the French Communist Party, I think in the 50s, but he'd left by the time 68 rolled around, and he was definitively anti-revolutionary by the time 68 came. He'd abandoned Marxism and become an anti-Marxist, an anti-communist. So, like, how you can say that Foucault is a Marxist, I don't know. The only way you could say that Foucault is a Marxist is if you look at Foucault's work. So Foucault's biggest and most well-known works, the one I read years ago, Discipline and Punish, History of the Prison System, his work on the history of sexuality, his work on the history of sanity and insanity in the asylum, and you look at Foucault's work like deconstructing like the edifices of power, and you take like that as your example of Marxism. You say that Foucault and Derrida's deconstruction and the work of Jean-François Lyotard, this sort of the postmodern trinity, and others. There's others, of course. But you take them and say, look, they want to deconstruct everything. They want to deconstruct all of the things about our society and reduce it to, they want to hollow it out from within, make us stop believing in our precious Disney films and the current wonderful American system. And then when our belief in all of that has collapsed, then the Marxists will swoop in and take over once they've demoralized us and sapped our spirit. And by the way, that's the same argument that reactionaries were putting forward in the 1920s. After the Bolshevik Revolution, they were saying that there were hidden communists everywhere in Britain or America who were hollowing us out from within. And Soviet defectors in the 80s used to go over to the United States and sell this line as well, because it's what like the Mad Men CIA officers who recruited them wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that the Soviet Union was secretly running all these philosophers and influencing operations in the US, which was designed to hollow out US society and make it collapse from within. Which was all bullshit, of course. The Soviet Union in the 80s by that stage wasn't interested in doing any of that, and they were never really interested in doing that during the revolutionary period either. But this is what the reactionaries in the US wanted to hear. So these paid traitors that they got in from the USSR would go on TV and tell the reactionaries what they wanted to hear. Oh yes, the KGB is running influence operations to make sure that Americans lose their faith in their constitution and destroy American culture. And I'm sure Solzhenitsyn was happy to tell them that as well. President Jesus says, Peterson actually said he was a huge fan of Zizek during that debate. He just couldn't understand why Zizek attached himself to Marxism. Zizek responded that he liked some stuff in Capital. Yeah, and inadvertently, Peterson stumbles on the truth, which is that Zizek isn't a Marxist at all. He's no more of a Marxist than Peterson is. Sid says, these liberals, Sockdams and intellectual Frankfurt School Marxists are virtually useless in the face of fascism. They fold like sissies and run or pretend everything's okay. Well, or frequently they end up siding with the fascists, or at least siding with the ruling class. I mean, their whole object of social democracy and Frankfurt School types is to provide a form of Marxism that's acceptable to the ruling class, and therefore it's a form of Marxism which is false and useless to the working class. Ian Foster says, postmodernism is philosophical irrationalism. Very true. Tim Gray says, there is a line you could take about the promotion of postmodernist theory was designed to undermine and fragment the understanding of the grand narrative, so we end up with individualism. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, the postmodern stuff was promoted to, in order to attack Marxism, most certainly. I would say that the damage had already been done in some respects before the postmodernists came along. So, like, by the time you reach the late 60s, like, revisionism in the Soviet Union had done a lot of damage, and it had done a lot of damage in the European communist parties as well. Like, the French Communist Party was already a social democratic train wreck by the time 1968 came around. It was already being run by people who were essentially reformists in all but name. And the damage done by the Khrushchevites had gone a long way to already destroying Marxism. Postmodernism just finished it off, basically, philosophically speaking. But then this is why Marxism needed to be rebirthed via the experiences of revolutions in China, revolutionary processes in South America and Africa, and the legacy of Western Marxism after World War II needed to be critiqued and then rejected. Chicken Pot Pie says Zizek is such a fraud that Peterson sounds normal and reasonable in comparison. Well, I think I might, if people are particularly lucky, I might just try and recreate the whole debate between those two myself. I could probably make more sense. Okay, right. So tomorrow we are going to be back with another one of these where I'm going to be looking at the questions arising from Emmanuel Macron's speech to the French nation. Because Macron is apparently addressing the nation tomorrow in response to his most recent comments regarding the war in Ukraine and regarding his threats and promises to deploy French troops there. that's going to be an interesting discussion to have. So I'll be back online tomorrow. I'll be online immediately after I've got the translation through of Macron's speech. My French is still particularly tourist level French, so I can ask the way to the beach and ask the way to the bar, but I can't understand a French president when he's talking shit, or I should say talking mad. So thank you to everybody who has tuned in tonight in what is another really active and very interesting discussion in the chat. You can find the audio version of this will be up on the Patreon site tomorrow. But until then, I'll thank everybody who's contributed tonight and throw you back over to your musical interlude.